So the newest movie to hit the MCU is Captain Marvel. And if you saw my prelude video, the one where I talked about the changing faces of superhero movies, you know I was expecting quite a lot. And boy did it deliver.
Welcome to the heart of the stories we tell. My name is Rob, and tonight I will be reviewing
Captain Marvel. And Captain Marvel flies in faster, higher, and stronger than most of the other Avengers. Now, it's kind of funny, because this is going to be the second of the first of two Captain Marvel movies coming out. The other one by DC. There's a funny thing about the names with that and why it's called Shazam instead, but this character is Carol Danvers, and she's pretty badass. If you saw my original video, you know that I hold a lot of stake in the fact that she might just be the most powerful Avenger in the MCU. And if you took that gauntlet off Thanos, he would stand no chance against her. None whatsoever. She's not the only character to have ever used the name Captain Marvel either. In fact, she started off as Miss Marvel, but right now there's another character using that name as well, one inspired by her, ironically enough. We also have another character that shows up throughout the movie that also held that name for a little while, Captain Marvel, although now she's going by Spectrum. The character itself had several different power sets, her most powerful being binary. And going in, one of the questions I had was whether or not we would see her go full-bore binary or not. And before we even get into spoiler section, let me just say, they do Carol justice. She's a powerhouse, but they never make her overpowered. I saw one review that just the article title was the moment at the end when she became a Mary Sue. And I'm like, you mean the moment where she used her powers? I mean, come on. Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel, Captain Marvel, is already one of the most badass, powerful characters in the comics. The fact that Rogue took her powers, and as such, Rogue is one of the most powerful characters in the X-Men, should tell you something. Overall, the movie was good and enjoyable. It wasn't the best MCU movie ever, but I'm giving it a solid silver rating, and I can't wait to see how she comes into Endgame. But before I get too far ahead, what I do here on this channel is I review stories like this, and I come up with theories of storytelling, how and why we tell stories. If that sounds interesting to you, then come on and join our little community. Leave me a comment, a like, subscribe if you'd like, and of course, if you really love me, join my Patreon to help me support the channel. In general, this was a hero's journey. It was just a hero's journey done out of sequence. It was very much a Cinderella story. The idea that someone gained their powers and then had to figure out how to use them. And I will tell you already, one of the greatest moments was whenever she wasn't using her powers. It's kind of funny how badass she is, her human connection between her and Fury, between her and her best friend, between her and her cat, well, not really her cat, but any way you look at it, between her and Monica, who is just a child in this, all of these little interpersonal moments really connect with who Carol is. And honestly, I had my own problems with Brie Larson and the way she acts, and she is still a little wooden, but when she's actually being human and what she does at the end of the movie really makes me think that she's going to grow into a Captain Marvel that we could all love. The character itself is rather straightforward. Getting her powers from Mar-Vell, she takes on the moniker Miss Marvel, and then later Captain Marvel. They skip over the Miss part and just go right to Captain because it's what the current comic book character uses. So just, keep it all in line. She's a powerhouse that has the ability to absorb energy, redirect it, fly, super strength, super speed. Basically, all of the Superman powers. In fact, if you didn't want any spoilers, but you wanted some idea about what this was as a movie, imagine what would happen if Superman just happened to be a chick and got thrown into the MCU. But now that we've done that, let's kick this over to spoiler time.
So once again, it's stop. Spoiler time.
Okay, so I assume you've already seen it if you're here. This movie kicks the ground running, and it does so because it drops us in the middle of the action. Literally. Carol doesn't know who she is. She doesn't know what's going on. She's currently been kind of brainwashed, and she's in the middle of what is basically her first assignment for the Kree. And then she gets to find out all about why she is who she is. And it's pretty badass. Let me start off by saying there's a few things that are going to ruffle some feathers here, and already have ruffled some feathers, and that's the girl power. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I'm not a feminist, but I at least consider myself somewhat allied with the feminist thought process. The fact that her namesake was Avenger for her call sign at the end of the movie is why we call it the Avengers Initiative is going to rub some people the wrong way. And I can somewhat understand that, except for the fact that it never really made sense why they were called the Avengers in the movies otherwise. I mean, seriously. In an adaptation like this, yeah, we use the word Avengers because that's what the name of the comic was. And to be honest, most of the feminist stuff in there really just rings true to the feminism that was in the Miss Marvel comics back in the 70s anyway. So yeah, there's a little bit of it. And maybe a couple times during the movie I felt like they might have kind of, I don't know, gone a little too far with some things. I'll be honest, the you should smile more thing with the bike, maybe that wasn't needed. But overall, most of that gets forgotten quickly for an action-packed drama that gave us what is basically a pretty straightforward story. Stranger in a Strange Land is really just someone coming home after not being there for a long time. Person who's lost their memory and who it turns out, hey, surprise, surprise, your memories have to do with the very first mission you're sent on. Again, I mean, this is pretty bog standard plot stuff. But let's break down the moments and the elements of the fiction. Starting where we always do with the setting. And anyone that's been paying attention for even the slightest bit knows this is set in the MCU. Same one that all the Avenger films took place in, Spider-Man, all of that. And the one that everyone just got dusted with the great snapping. But this takes place before the first Avenger movie. In fact, it takes place before even the first Iron Man movie. The only movie that takes place before it is Captain America. It's in the 90s, and it very much is a product of the 90s, especially with things like the musical influences, the way they make fun of the different outfits they're wearing. Hell, she crash lands in a blockbuster to begin the movie. So, I mean, if those things don't scream 90s to you, I don't know what does. But it's kind of like weird to have that nostalgia for the 90s at this point because, you know, I was a teenager when this movie was set, but looking back at things like a two-way pager communicator, it was kind of advanced tech back then. But alright, the characters. So some of these we knew going in. Obviously, we have Captain Marvel. We knew we had Ronan. We knew that we were going to get a bunch of Guardians of the Galaxy secondary characters. But we end up with this interesting character of a Skrull that's been running alongside the whole story. And when we were wondering whether it was Mar-Vell or Young Roth, it's Roth. And of course, we have Marvel's sidekick for all of this, Nick Fury. Just call him Fury. Everyone calls him Fury. But then we have another surprising character, because we do have Mar-Vell. It's just a gender-swapped one. I almost jumped out of my seat when I realized that it was, at first I thought just a human scientist, but I mean, that's totally Mar-Vell. And that's Mar-Vell's backstory, too. In order to end the war, he, well, in this case she, decided to come to Earth and hide out and try to do stuff, and then ended up empowering Carol. That's pretty much the origin. But I in no way expected that to be Annette Bening's character. And it kind of also helps that whole feminist mystique. She didn't get her powers from a guy. In fact, she got it from a mother figure. Just an interesting twist. But let's talk about the plot. For a movie that I'd rave about, the plot really isn't anything to speak of. The plot is, again, a pretty bog-standard action sequence origin story. It's got a couple twists and turns here and there, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. The story itself really takes a backseat to the character development and the moments, and of course the action. And you know what the best part is? Well, no, I'll save that for the good, the bad, and the ugly. The plot itself advances out of sequence. Like I said, we start off with her in the middle of an action sequence, and then we end up with her figuring out who she is, and by the end of the movie, she's using her powers pretty badassly. We also get little tiny stepstone moments that make me think of the original Iron Man movie. Remember when Tony was learning how to fly and it was kind of funny? We get moments like that, but instead of it being funny, it's all during action sequences. Everything we see her do isn't training. We see her doing it in life or death struggles. And there is some great pacing, and at the end of the day, one of the best things is the way they showcase through her flashbacks that happen throughout the entire movie how she has become who she was, even when she herself didn't remember. But okay, whose point of view do we follow? Duh. It's her movie. That it's literally right in the title. So for the most part, we follow the title character of Captain Marvel. Every once in a while, we kind of switch around into Fury or someone else. And at the end, we get a surprise as to who we're following. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. Speaking of straightforward, what about themes and symbolism? There are a couple little hidden gems in here, but for the most part, this is a pretty straightforward action, and the main theme is girl power, is the fact that every time you knock the woman down, she's gonna get back up. And, I mean, there's nothing the matter with that. In fact, I'd say that this has the same base theme running, with just a feminist angle on it, that the Batman Begins movie had. And that movie was just bonkers awesome, so this one is too. But alright, let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there is so much good about this movie that it's so hard to just pick one or two things. But I'm gonna focus on two here. First is Samuel L. Jackson. He steals the show, as always. He's an actor that can do no wrong, so just totally awesome. But the second one is actually what I think is course correcting. They're fixing what my main problem with the MCU is with this film. And what is that problem? Well, it's something called bathos, the reverse of pathos. And I did a whole video on it, but at the end of the day, they go for the laugh way, way too often in MCU movies, especially things like Thor Ragnarok and Doctor Strange, that I thought that as much as they were good, they really got hurt by certain scenes. But you know what? This movie allowed me to laugh and allowed me to cheer, and it was fun. But at the same time, wasn't pulling any punches. It didn't tell a joke that stripped it of its punch. It hit hard at every scene, and as such, this might go down as one of my favorite MCU movies. But having said that, let's talk about the bad. The first bad part is that this got kind of crammed in. This movie would have been super badass if it was before the first Avenger movie. It would have been kind of cool if it was before Age of Ultron. But where it's jammed in here right before Endgame, it's so going to feel tacked on to the point where I almost feel like I understand when people are going to call her a Deus Ex Machina. Oh, you introduce her in this chapter just so next chapter she can come in and beat Thanos. Well, yeah, kind of. For a universe that has so much time world building, to just throw her in at the last second kind of feels a little meh. But again, that's not really, I guess, the movie itself's fault. But the ugly is. The ugly is the ad campaign, the counter ad campaign, and even a little bit of Brie Larson's way she handles things. Because point blank, this is not a political movie. This is not a feminist movie. What this is a kick-ass, totally perfect superhero movie that people are going to get the wrong idea and be like, oh, they're only making her a Mary Sue because she's so powerful. Well, no, Captain Marvel is that powerful. There are very few people in the MCU, there are very few people in Marvel Comics that I can say could go toe-to-toe with the mainline DC heroes. Captain Marvel has always been one of them. And I'm perfectly great with the idea that female empowerment is part of what comic books are about. But at the same time, I sit there and I wonder, in this environment, could they maybe have kind of stretched things a little too thin? Especially with the fact that they gender swapped Marvel. Not that, and again, I totally get it. And then they used her call sign as Avenger, which again, I like. But I think that they might have pushed a few too boundaries. I'm curious to see how that turns out. But of course, then there's the post-credit scene. And of course, I'm talking about the cat that's the Furlough Reservoir that coughs up the hairball, right? Okay, yeah, we already knew what was going on with the Tesseract because the Tesseract's already been destroyed. I'm talking about the end credit scene where we get what's gotta be a scene in the middle of Endgame, where Cap is sitting there and like, hey, whatever Fury came up with, this has to be important. And then she just stands there and is all like, where's Fury? And now I've heard a lot of people talk about behind the scenes, there's like some sorts of power struggle. But you know what? In that moment, I saw an Avenger lineup that I loved. And I felt that it was someone that could take Thanos. And something that really felt like a completion of all of the phases so far. But those were my thoughts. A silver rating for a movie that I think is a perfectly great example of how we can turn a comic book into an action movie. About how we can make strong female characters and maybe a few missteps here and there. You know what the only misstep that I really, really wish they hadn't made? Since they were using Coulson and Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D., why didn't we get a guest house reference? Seriously, we could have finally tied that in. For those of you that don't know, the guest house is what Nick Fury and Agent Coulson used back in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show in order to bring people back from the dead. They had someone that was a dead Kree, which people had even guessed might be Mar-Vell. And I mean, seriously, that dead blue body could have been something perfect to be used for this. But, oh well, missed opportunity. But again, those were my thoughts. I wonder what yours are. Let me know down in the comments below. Especially let me know, did you think that it was too over the top with the feminism? Did you think that it was a good representation? And of course, if you have an extra minute or two, if you could like and share this video. And of course, if you haven't already, click that subscribe button to join our little community here. Or even join us over on Patreon. A big thank you to all of those that have already. And of course, even if you can't support with money, just the comment, the like, the share, the subscribe alone to help build this community is enough. Because that is how we're going to move forward and try to get to the heart of all the stories we tell. In the next couple of days, I'm going to really think about it, probably see the movie again, and then I might try to dissect a little more about what's going on in this one. If you want to know, click that subscribe button. For now, I hope you have a good night, and thanks for watching.